Satoru Iwata was born on December 6, 1959, in Sapporo, Japan, as the son of a local politician and a student of one of the country's top schools, Sapporo South High School. His interest in computers grew into game development after spending money from a part-time dishwashing job on his first computer, a Hewlett-Packard HP 65 calculator, which he used to conjure up intricate volleyball and missile attack games on a device whose tiny screen could only display numbers. In 1982, his computer-savvy interests landed him at the Tokyo Institute of Technology for a program in computer science, and this time, Iwata used his graduation gift money to buy a Commodore PET, the world's first all-in-one computer, which he quickly fell in love with. He spent hours in college disassembling programs for this computer by writing on-screen memory dumps by hand, scribbling them from the screen onto paper without even using a printer. This extreme dedication to computers was a passion he shared with the employees of the computer department at a local Seibu department store. Together, they formed a new company, HAL Laboratory, out of a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Akihabara with only 5 employees. But also around this time, during the early 80s, Satoru Iwata's father, Hiroshi Iwata, won election for the municipal mayoral office of the industrial city of Muroran. Satoru had become the prodigy of a top school and was now the son of a mayor, and he faced heavy familial pressure to dedicate his career towards anything but fun and games. But that wasn't enough to convince him to join the country's political elite. He was destined to join their business elite, but first by cutting his teeth over a rigorous decade of programming, engineering, and debugging. Upon graduation, he went straight from part-timing at HAL to full-timing, and as the only person with game development experience on staff, he got invited for a trip to Nintendo for a sneak peek at their upcoming Famicom. And without even trying to program for it, he already found himself pitching game projects during the visit. In those days, Nintendo wasn't already established as a gaming company, and there weren't many computer programmers who specialized in games. Iwata was a godsend for Nintendo. He was young, ambitious, and already highly experienced, and had some influence over a small tech firm of his own. With Iwata's initiative, HAL Laboratory was now among Nintendo's first second-party developers, later to become one of their first-party houses. A number of games were worked on by HAL, but published under Nintendo's name. These were a lot of the simple-titled little sports competitions you see in the early days of the NES life cycle. Balloon Fight, Golf, Pinball, F1 Race. By supporting a lot of these small, but oftentimes troubled, early developments, HAL gradually earned the trust to develop major projects of its own, starting with Kirby's Dream Land in 1992, which Iwata co-developed with Masahiro Sakurai to create a game specifically for beginners, where anyone could play it from beginning to end and have fun for the entire way through. As the scale of HAL Laboratory and its projects increased, their years of success eventually led to a crisis. Their financial bubble burst after having borrowed most of their money before investing in moving their headquarters to Yamanashi. In 1992, HAL Laboratory filed for bankruptcy. But their close relationship with Nintendo saved them yet again. President Hiroshi Yamauchi agreed to support HAL during its troubled times under only one condition, that Satoru Iwata become its president. With no other choice, Iwata crunched for almost an entire decade. This period, from 1992 to 1999, is where a lot of lofty stories about his uncanny programming feats come from. Despite his managerial position as the company's president, Iwata completely rebuilt the codebase for Earthbound from scratch, shaving off a predicted 2 years of extra development time. In 1999, he was working on both Super Smash Bros. And Pokémon Stadium, where he had to port over the battle system from the Game Boy games without the original documents. He figured it all out by reading the source code and playing the games, and then got it all working within a week. At the same time, Pokémon Gold and Silver were being developed, and he created compression tools that squeezed the entirety of the first game's world map onto a tiny Game Boy cartridge just under 1 megabyte. Over those years, HAL paid back its prior debts and finally balanced its budget, but almost immediately, Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi asked him to come over and work for them. And unfortunately, this was just before the GameCube started to become a flop. Iwata gave Nintendo his last big programming hurrah during the debug phase of Super Smash Bros. Melee, and even though the console had some well-reviewed exclusives, there just weren't enough of them coming out fast enough to outsell the competition. In 2002, the aging Hiroshi Yamauchi needed a successor for the presidency of a slouching Nintendo, and after seeing Iwata's success turning around the budget of HAL, he personally appointed Iwata as the newest and the first non-family related president of Nintendo. 4 years were spent stewing up some Iwata ideas that gradually led to Nintendo's most profitable products ever. In 2004, when most games were about shooting up aliens and demons, Iwata was instead striking a deal with a Japanese neuroscientist who ended up marketing a lineup of math puzzle games that eventually sold 19 million copies. Nintendo's Game Boy line was followed up by a double-screen touchscreen device that had players taking care of puppies, and 24 million of them were sapped up into how adorable it was. In 2006, a console with a funny name and technical specs generations behind the competition overwhelmed the competition. The Nintendo Wii was Iwata's own unconventional and risky brainchild that had him tackling many of the same higher-minded issues we're still tackling today, like diminishing demographics, like how many people and what kind of people are able to enjoy video games, and how to create an emotional connection between a player's actions and the story on the screen. And the games that resulted weren't sleek, high-tech, imitation Hollywood blockbusters. The games the Wii cultivated were cute, they were friendly, they were approachable and polite. More than anything else, they were fun. And this was Iwata's personal sentiment that became Nintendo's wildly successful corporate motif for the next decade. It was a design philosophy that he had cultivated since the days of Kirby, games specifically made for beginners, games that anyone could play and enjoy, no matter who they were. It was a move to tear down the barrier of specialization that led to his own career. He wanted to share his love of games with people who would never have anywhere close to his level of experience with computers. The Wii outsold the competing consoles almost 2-1, dominating a segment of the market that would steadily become its own isolated and volatile niche. Nintendo's new key art was just a sleek white background with a friendly and familiar face on top, which eventually included the executives themselves. Most people probably know of Iwata from the Nintendo Directs, which started out in 2011 as the Wii's sales stalled when yet another console generation was due. These presentations didn't just market him as president, but also as a personality, with recurring gags, lighthearted sketches, and rehearsed, edited speeches delivered right to the camera, offsetting the costs of the expensive live presentations staged by other companies for something a bit easier on the eyes, which also augmented Nintendo's character as an easier, friendlier, and more approachable alternative. However, Iwata's second, and more hardcore-oriented attempt at a Wii failed to relive the success of the original. This time, the Wii U's name didn't exactly sell the idea to mainstream consumers, and though the console still produces well-reviewed games, the sales of them aren't high enough to keep the company in the green. Analysts blame a more software-oriented market, with much of these customers now playing games on the internet and smartphones instead of consoles. However, Iwata vehemently spoke out against that argument in 2011, saying that if Nintendo were to make smartphone games, they would cease to be Nintendo. After a successful generation with the Wii, Nintendo saw their first operating loss in 27 years in 2011, with Iwata taking a 50% pay cut to help weather the losses and prevent layoffs. When this loss was followed up again with another one in 2014, Iwata cut his pay a second time by another 50%. And this was when he finally began to budge on his stance towards mobile gaming. A partnership with Dina will see Nintendo games operating on non-Nintendo platforms for the first time in decades. And even though whatever they were trying with the Wii U isn't apparently working, Nintendo's ready to dip into Iwata's blue ocean strategy yet again, with unspecified health products and a next-gen NX console being said to experiment rather than iterate on the industry's previous ideas. Iwata worked this company through its successes and its failures to the very end. His last public appearance was during an investor's call just 1 week before his passing. But we'll still see his ideas and his contributions to the company continue over the next few years. But until then, the best way to remember his accomplishments is to play. To play and have fun, no matter what you're doing, no matter who you are, what you are, or where you are. Because what his experiment found out, and what he helped all of us to realize, is that despite the showy presentations and spectacles of video games, in the end, we would all just like to play.